Also, not suggesting that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's
I
only
mean,
CNN.
how can I smuggle? How can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it.
I don't understand what the compute is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin.
The media narrative of the supposed mistakenly deported immigrant from Maryland seems to be crumbling as El Salvador's president publicly deems him a designated terrorist. So CNN's Kaitlan Collins asks if the man who was mistakenly deported would be returned, and in sequential order, Trump's team lays down the facts. So let's watch this.
I support it. Go ahead. Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CNN. Low-rated. Which one is that? Well, let me ask Pam. Would you answer that question?
President, first and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, two courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country.
So, just to set the record straight, Kilmar Abrego Garcia did in fact enter the country illegally, as Pam Bondi mentioned. The media narrative is that he was mistakenly deported as if he was a citizen and never entered illegally. That is not true. Bondi mentioned two immigration courts found that he did enter the country illegally. Bondi mentioned two immigration courts found that he entered the country illegally back in 2019. So why was he still in the country after 2019? Because the court deemed his life would be in danger if deported back to El Salvador. Now, if we put on our thinking caps, the next question would be, why is his life in danger?
Right now, it was additional paperwork had needed to be done. That's up to El Salvador if they want to return him. That's not up to us. The Supreme Court ruled, President, that if, as El Salvador wants to return him, this is international matters, foreign affairs, if they wanted to return him, we would facilitate it, meaning provide a plane.
So will you return him?
You are doing a great job. Thank you, Pam.
So we would assume that it would be up to an individual's country of origin if they should be allowed in or out of that said country. Garcia is a citizen of El Salvador. That is a fact, separate from whether or not he is actually a member of MS-13. What Bondi's saying is that it isn't up to the U.S. Supreme Court to decide what another nation should or shouldn't allow their legal citizen to do. If President Bukele decides to free him, which is his prerogative, then the Trump administration could facilitate by providing a plane. What the media is spinning is that the Trump administration was ordered to return him. That is not true. He was not ordered to return him. In fact, the Supreme Court and federal courts can't give the president that type of order. He was ordered to facilitate, which is a very different legal term.
Stephen Miller, wait a minute. Could you just also respond to that question? Because, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. But would you answer that question also, President?
Yep. So, as Pam mentioned, there's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As two immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. So we had a deportation order that was valid, which meant that under our law, he's not even allowed to be present in the United States.
So again, Miller is reiterating some key points. Two immigration courts found him to have entered illegally, and MS-13 is a categorized terrorist organization, which by default prevents any members from being in the country illegally. subject for deportation.
And had to be returned because of the foreign terrorist designation. This issue was then, by a district court judge, completely inverted, and a district court judge tried to tell the administration that they had to kidnap a citizen of El Salvador and fly him back here. That issue was raised at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the district court order was unlawful, and its main components were reversed 9-0 unanimously, stating clearly that neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador, who again is a member of MS-13, which, as I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world, and I can promise you, if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
So there's two Supreme Court cases I think people are confused by. The one that the media is claiming the Supreme Court ordered Trump to return Garcia, and the one Miller is referencing that says district court judges do not have the legal right to impede the Trump administration's deportation efforts. And the claim of him being an MS-13 member is being made to be a type of he said, she said situation. But both the Department of Justice and the El Salvadorian government have deemed him a member of MS-13. The only claim that he isn't a member of said gang is that his wife says he's not, and his lawyer says he denies it, which is not a valid testimony in the grand scheme of things. Trump dissenters and supporters of Garcia only have the claim of, well, Trump is lying, which isn't critical thinking. People are arrested every day and police do their job based on evidence. Are we just going to run off the notion that these institutions are all fraudulent? That is a progressive notion that institutions are all fraudulent. And if the wife says he's not a member of MS-13, we should just believe her?
So you don't plan
But
to
the
ask
Supreme Court is asking to, and what was the ruling, Kelly, in the Supreme Court, Steve? Was it 9-0?
Yes, the 9-0 in our favor. In our favor, against the judicial rule, saying that no district court has the power to compel a foreign policy for essay. As Pan said, it would be solely stated that in this situation were at El Salvador's sole discretion was set back for our country, that we get to point of a second. And no version of this legally ends up with an ever-living cure, because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That's the president of El Salvador. Your questions about for the court can only be directed to him.
Se lo liberaría, presidente.
Well, I'm supposedly not suggesting that I'll smuggle a terrorist into the United States.
It's
I mean,
always
how can I smuggle? How can I return him to the United States? Like, is I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, I mean, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States? I don't have the power to return him to the United States. Yeah, but I'm not releasing. I mean, we're not very fond of releasing terrorists into our country. I mean, we just turned the murder capital of the world into the safest country of the Western Hemisphere, and you want us to go back into the releasing criminals so we can go back to being the murder capital of the world? No, that's not going to happen.
Well, they'd love.
So that is a clear acknowledgement from the president of El Salvador that Garcia is a designated terrorist. If you are a Trump dissenter, is your argument just that they're lying? Okay. What's your evidence? Because the media spun the story as mistakenly deported man. See, journalism is narrative. This is another case of the media jumping the gun and spinning a story, and now they are fighting for their lives because they've doubled down on this specific narrative. Like, people are so quick to question the Trump administration, but are not as quick to question the media. If we are skeptical of institutions, then why not be fair and be skeptical of the media as well?
To have a criminal, released into
I mean, there's a fascination.
They would love it.
Yeah.
They're sick. Use the sick people. Marco, do you have something to say about?
Yeah, I mean, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what they keep puking. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin. Except for Venezuela, that wasn't refusing to take people back, or places like that. I can tell you this, Mr. President. No, the foreign policy of the United States is conducted by the President of the United States, not by a court. And no court in the United States has a right to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. It's that simple. End of story.
I think people are heavily confused by how the system works. Even if you disregard the MS-13 allegations or the back and forth between the courts and Trump, he entered the country illegally. It is a fact acknowledged by the courts that he entered the country illegally. There is no confusion there. And Rubio is correct. Foreign policy has always been conducted by the President of the United States, not by any court.
And that's what the Supreme Court held, by the way, to Marco's point. The Supreme Court said exactly what Marco said, that no court has the authority to tell the foreign policy function of the United States. We won a case 9-0, and people like CNN are portraying it as a loss, as usual, because they want foreign terrorists in the country who kidnap women and children. But President Trump, his policy is foreign terrorists that are here illegally get expelled from the country, which, by the way, is a 90-10 issue.
Well, the president, Mr. President, you said that the Supreme Court said someone be referring to the Biden.
How long do we have to answer this question from you? Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our factory? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over, and that's why nobody watches you anymore? You know, you have no credibility. Please, go ahead.
So there you have it. Interaction between Kaitlan Collins, CNN, and Trump administration and El Salvador's president. So there's a lot happening here. Obviously, CNN and the mainstream media, if you go and look at different news sites, if you just type in, mistakenly deported man, you'll find over and over the specific narrative that the media is trying to push with the situation. And Trump kind of hit it the nail on the head. How many times are we going to answer this question? It seems like no matter what the Trump administration says, no matter what the El Salvador's president says, no matter what Pam Bondi, Stephen Miller, Marco Rubio says, the media is set on their narrative of this was a mistakenly deported man. He was here legally. The Trump administration made a mistake, and they're going to run with that story no matter what. Absolutely no matter what. That's how they're going to run with the story. They're going to say that the Supreme Court ruling that was 9-0 was a loss for Trump. It wasn't. They're going to ignore the fact that it said that even if you look at the ruling, they even said that the federal court judge who made the order went too far, kind of overstepped her boundaries. Because like Rubio said, why is there confusion in this sense? The President of the United States handles foreign policy, not any federal court judge. How are we going to tell another country what they should and shouldn't do with their citizen? Even if the United States, even if a federal court judge, a small court judge, gave them a temporary stay, a withholding of deportation. Even if a federal court judge says that, if El Salvador says, hey, we want our citizen back, and at that point it's foreign affairs, why should the U.S. not give him back? Especially if he's saying, like El Salvador's president just said, that they've cleaned up the streets. They've taken care of a lot of the gangs. His life shouldn't really be in danger. And a withholding of deportation is not a green card, it's not a visa, it's not a path to citizenship. It's a temporary status that can be revoked. It's not a one-all, infinite, permanent stay order. That's not a withholding. That's not what a withholding of deportation is, which people are heavily confused about. So, anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and we'll catch you in the next one.